everything you've seen about medieval cooking in movies is a lie. Peasants didn't have kitchens, not even close. So where did they actually prepare food for their families? The answer involves a setup so bizarre, modern health inspectors would have a complete meltdown. Walk into a medieval peasant home and you won't find a kitchen. No counters, no designated cooking area, just one cramped room where everything happened at once. And I mean everything. The spot where Dad slept last night, that's where Mom's making porridge this morning. The corner where the goat lives, that's dinner prep in 3 hours. Medieval peasants didn't cook in kitchens because kitchens simply didn't exist for them. Here's what's wild. Cooking locations actually shifted throughout the day based on survival needs, not convenience. Morning meals happen near doorways. Why? Ventilation. You need that smoke going somewhere. By midday, food prep moved toward windows where natural light made it easier to spot a rotten turnip before it ended up in the stew. Evening cooking, that shifted to the room's center where the hearth kept everyone warm. Basically, they were playing musical chairs with their dinner, but here's the thing most people miss. Many meals weren't really cooked at all. Bread got torn up and soaked in broth. Cheese crumbled directly into ale. Vegetables eaten raw or barely warmed. Fire meant fuel, and fuel meant labor. Sometimes the smartest cooking was no cooking. Then there were the smoke-sensitive tasks. Heating milk near an open fire sounds simple enough, right? Wrong. Soot particles would contaminate it, curdling the whole batch. So anything delicate got done outdoors or right by the door. One mistake and you've wasted your family's dairy for the week. Now picture this chaos multiplied. Grandma's warming herbs in one corner. A 6-year-old is stirring something near the fire. Mom's assembling the main meal somewhere in between. No central meal, no one chef, just organized mayhem. Archaeological digs prove this. Scientists found multiple cooking zones within single-room homes. Dark stains on ancient floors showing exactly where fires burned at different times throughout the year. Winter layouts kept everything clustered near the central flame. Summer spread things out toward any opening that caught a breeze. So where exactly was this fire everyone huddled around? That's where things get really interesting. Now here's where things get interesting. The average peasant home? One room. That's it. One room for sleeping, eating, working, and yes, cooking. Right in the center of that dirt floor sat a fire pit that never went out. I mean never. See, matches wouldn't exist for another several hundred years. If your fire died, you had two options. Beg your neighbor for hot coals like some medieval mooch, or spend 30 minutes striking flint against steel while your family stared at you. Neither option was fun. So that fire burned constantly, day and night, summer and winter. It was your stove, your heater, your only light source after sunset. Pretty efficient when you think about it, but here's the catch. No chimney. Smoke just rose up and escaped through a hole in the thatched roof called a louver. Sometimes it escaped, sometimes it didn't. Everything in that house smelled like a campfire. Your clothes, your hair, your food. You probably stopped noticing after the first decade or so. The rafters above, black as coal from years of soot and creosote buildup. Honestly, I'm amazed more cottages didn't burst into flames. Many did, actually, and the cooking itself demanded serious dedication. Temperatures couldn't be adjusted with a dial. You had flames or you had nothing. This meant constant attention, constant stirring, constant vigilance. Medieval women spent roughly 5 hours daily just preparing meals. 5 hours. That's a part-time job with zero pay and smoke in your eyes. The average family burned through 2 to 3 tons of wood annually, just for cooking and heating. Gathering that fuel alone consumed about 1 day per week. We complain about grocery shopping taking an hour. Makes sense, right? The central fire location wasn't random. Heat radiated outward in all directions, warming the entire room evenly. Clever design born from necessity. But burning wood constantly meant someone needed vessels that could handle direct flame contact for hours on end. And this is where medieval engineering got surprisingly sophisticated. Those 3-leg pots, they changed everything. Iron pots cost about a month's wages. Let that sink in. A single cooking vessel equaled 30 days of back-breaking labor. So when Grandma died, the cauldron got mentioned in her will right alongside the goats. But here's why these pots were worth every penny. 3 legs. That's the innovation that changed medieval cooking forever. A cauldron with 3 legs could stand directly in hot coals without wobbling or tipping. No tables needed, no stovetops. No kitchen counters, just plop it in the fire and walk away. Well, not completely away. You'd still burn dinner, but you get the point. Now, if iron was too expensive, clay pots worked fine. Mostly. They cracked if you looked at them wrong, and direct flame contact? Forget about it. One temperature shock, and you're picking pottery shards out of your pottage. Not ideal. The clever design that really impressed me was the potager. Long handle, really long. This let cooks swing heavy pots away from flames without scorching their eyebrows off. Medieval engineering at its finest, honestly. And here's something wild. A skilled potter could make roughly 40 cooking vessels per day. 40. Yet demand was so insane that people actually repaired broken pots with iron rivets instead of replacing them. That's like fixing a cracked smartphone screen with duct tape because you can't get a new one for 6 months. Then there were griddle stones. Flat rocks heated in coals became the medieval frying pan. Perfect for flatbreads and oatcakes. Quick, simple, and completely free if you found the right stone by the river. Makes sense why peasants treasured these tools, right? But cooking vessels only solved half the problem. You could boil pottage and simmer stews all day long with your fancy 3-leg cauldron. Great. Bread was different. Bread required an oven. Real heat, enclosed heat. The kind of sustained temperature that turned dough into something actually edible instead of charred on the outside and raw in the middle. Most peasants couldn't afford their own ovens. So what did they do? They shared. And the people who owned those shared ovens, they charged for every single loaf. All right, so you've shaped your dough at home. You've kneaded it until your arms ached. Now what? Well, you can't bake it. Not in your own house anyway. Here's the thing most people don't realize. Building an oven required expensive materials. Brick, stone, constant fire maintenance, just to keep temperatures right. A peasant family could barely afford their cooking pot. An oven? That was like asking a medieval farmer to buy a Ferrari. So feudal lords stepped in with a solution. And by solution, I mean a money-making scheme. They built communal ovens called bannel ovens and charged peasants fees to use them. Skipping this tax wasn't just frowned upon. It was actually a punishable crime. You could get fined or worse for baking your own bread secretly at home. The Lord basically invented a medieval bread subscription service, except you couldn't cancel. Now here's where it gets interesting. Women would shape their dough at home, mark each loaf with distinctive cuts for identification, then carry everything to the village oven in baskets. Those cuts mattered. A single oven served anywhere from 50 to 200 families. Without your mark, good luck finding your bread among hundreds of identical loaves, and the scheduling was brutal. Some families got assigned baking times at 3 in the morning, others at midnight. You baked when the oven was available, not when it was convenient. But what if you couldn't afford the fees at all? Peasants got creative. They made something called ash cakes by wrapping dough in large leaves and burying it directly in hot hearth coals overnight. Not exactly artisan sourdough, but it filled stomachs. Oh, and here's a fun fact that'll impress someone at dinner. The expression upper crust, meaning wealthy people, it comes from these communal ovens. The cleaner top portion of bread went to wealthier customers. The ash-covered, dirty bottom went to peasants. Language literally preserved class distinctions in baked goods. So they had their bread. But keeping other food from spoiling? That required techniques so clever, they'd make your refrigerator jealous. So you've got your bread. You've got your pot bubbling over the hearth. But here's the problem nobody talks about. Medieval peasants had zero refrigeration. None. Not even a cool box, and yet somehow they kept food edible for months, sometimes years. Their secret weapon? Salt. And not the cheap stuff we sprinkle on fries today. We're talking about salt so valuable that Roman soldiers were literally paid with it. That's where the word salary comes from. 1 pound of salt preserved roughly 3 pounds of meat, which meant a single ham could cost more in salt than the pig itself was worth. But salt wasn't the only trick. Look up in any medieval peasant cottage and you'd see something hanging from the rafters. Hams, fish, sausages, all slowly curing in the rising smoke from the hearth below. The same fire that cooked dinner was simultaneously preserving next month's meals. Talk about multitasking. My college roommate couldn't even heat soup without setting off the smoke alarm, and these folks were running a smokehouse in their living room. Then there's the root cellar. Peasants dug holes beneath their cottage floors that stayed around 50 degrees year-round. No electricity, no compressor, just good old-fashioned underground physics. Carrots, turnips, and beets survived entire winters down there. And the fermentation? This is where things get genuinely fascinating. Cabbage became sauerkraut, milk became cheese, grape juice became wine. These transformations added months of shelf life while creating nutrients that didn't exist in the original food. Here's what blew my mind. Medieval peasants ate fermented foods at nearly every single meal. Modern gut health researchers have actually studied this. Turns out our ancestors had significantly more diverse gut bacteria than we do today. All those probiotics we pay premium prices for, they were just eating Tuesday's dinner. Dried beans and peas lasted even longer. Years, actually. Which explains why legumes dominated peasant cooking. They weren't boring. They were brilliant survival engineering, but preservation was only half the battle. The real skill, controlling fire itself without any temperature gauges whatsoever. Here's the thing about medieval cooking that nobody talks about. There were no thermometers, no dials, no little numbers telling you the temperature. So how did peasant cooks know when their fire was ready? They used their hands, literally. Hold your palm near the coals. Start counting. If you yanked it away at 2 seconds, you had high heat. 5 seconds, low and slow. Somewhere in between meant medium. That's it. That was the entire temperature system. Your pain tolerance was your kitchen thermometer, but fire management went way deeper than hand burns. Different woods did completely different jobs. Oak coals lasted for hours, perfect for stews that needed gentle simmering all day. Pine burned hot and fast, ideal for quick searing. Fruit woods added subtle flavors to meat. Every peasant cook knew these differences the way we know microwave settings. And here's where it gets clever. Raking coals into zones created multiple cooking temperatures simultaneously. Thick coal beds on one side for boiling water, thin scattered coals on the other for keeping food warm. Same fire, different heat levels. Medieval cooks basically invented the modern stovetop concept using nothing but a stick and some dirt. Children as young as 6 learned fire-tending duties, not babysitting tasks either, real skills. They learned to add wood gradually because dumping too much smothered flames entirely. They discovered that blowing through hollow reeds directed air precisely at dying embers, creating intense heat spots exactly where needed. Then there's night banking. This technique genuinely impressed me when I first read about it. Before bed, cooks buried hot coals under a thick ash layer. The ash insulated everything, keeping coals alive but dormant. Morning came, you raked away the ash, added some kindling, and your fire returned. Some families kept the same fire burning for weeks using this method. No matches required, no flint striking, just preserved heat waiting beneath gray powder. Makes sense why letting your fire die was basically a small disaster, right? But all this fire expertise meant nothing without the right fuel supply. And getting that fuel, that's where things got genuinely brutal. Summer hit and everything changed. That cozy central hearth, suddenly your worst enemy. Imagine lighting a bonfire inside a structure with a straw roof when it's already 80 degrees outside. Within an hour, your cottage becomes a medieval sauna, except nobody's relaxing. So peasants did the smart thing. They moved the whole cooking operation outside. This meant building separate fire pits in the yard. And here's something archaeologists noticed that's pretty clever. These outdoor pits sat consistently downwind from the cottages. Always. Because one stray spark hitting that thatched roof, your entire home goes up in about 3 minutes flat. Medieval peasants understood fire safety better than some modern campers I've met. Now let's talk about spit roasting. Sounds romantic, right? A whole chicken rotating over crackling flames. What nobody mentions is that someone had to turn that spit, constantly, for hours. This job usually fell to children, or servants if you were lucky enough to have them. Turn too slow, one side burns. Turn too fast, nothing cooks evenly. It was boring, hot, exhausting work. Basically the medieval version of being stuck on dish duty at Thanksgiving. Except it lasted all day. But peasants had tricks for avoiding this torture. Earth ovens changed everything. You dig a pit, line it with stones, build a massive fire until those stones glow red, then rake out the coals. Drop in your pig or goat, cover the whole thing with dirt and leaves. Walk away. 12 hours later, perfectly roasted meat. No turning, no watching, no burned eyebrows. Then there's haybox cooking. Bring your stew to a rolling boil, yank it off the fire, bury the whole pot in an insulated box stuffed with hay. The trapped heat keeps cooking for hours. Zero fuel needed. Medieval peasants basically invented the slow cooker, without electricity, without timers, and when feast days arrived, nobody cooked alone. Entire villages gathered around massive community fires, pooling equipment and labor, which raises an interesting question. All this cooking required two things peasants spent ridiculous amounts of time obtaining, and both were heavier than you'd think. Here's the thing about medieval cooking that nobody talks about. The actual food, that was the easy part. Getting water and fuel to make that food, that was a full-time job before the full-time job even started. Hauling water from the village well ate up roughly 90 minutes every single day. And we're not talking about a quick morning jog. We're talking heavy wooden buckets, 3 gallons each, carried on shoulders or balanced on heads. Sometimes 40 pounds per trip. Multiple trips. Before breakfast, my back hurts just thinking about it. But wait, there's more pain. Gathering firewood required approximately 1 full day per week. Just collecting fuel. Not cooking, not cleaning, just finding stuff to burn. Medieval peasants were basically professional wood hunters who occasionally ate, and you couldn't just grab any fallen branch. Feudal lords controlled forest access through something called wood rights. Take wood from the wrong area? Fines. Physical punishment. Sometimes worse. The lord's court didn't mess around about trees. Makes sense, right? Wood was medieval gold. Green wood caused problems too. Fresh-cut branches produced more smoke, less heat, and tons of frustration. Smart peasants stockpiled wood for months of drying before burning it. Planning ahead wasn't optional. It was survival. Then there's the weight issue nobody mentions. Women carrying those water buckets made multiple trips daily. Add gathering kindling, hauling heavier logs, feeding animals. These weren't gym workouts. This was just Tuesday. In treeless regions like Ireland and Scotland, families turned to peat. That spongy, compressed plant material from bogs. Cutting it, drying it, stacking it during summer months kept families warm and fed through winter. Different fuel, same backbreaking labor. The strangest part? This invisible work never appears in stories about medieval life. We hear about feasts and famines, knights and castles, but the hours spent just preparing to cook? Completely forgotten. Every bowl of pottage represented roughly 2 hours of water hauling and wood gathering before a single flame flickered. Now, all this effort meant nothing if you didn't eat at the right time of year, because medieval menus weren't chosen. They were dictated by something far more powerful than any lord. The calendar wasn't just decoration, it was literally the menu. Martinmas fell on November 11th, and there's a reason for that. Not religious, not cultural, practical. Cold weather had finally arrived, which meant you could slaughter a pig without the meat rotting before you finished salting it. Try butchering in September, and you'd have flies laying eggs in your ham before sunset. The medieval peasant didn't pick this date. Nature did. But here's what nobody talks about. Spring was terrifying. They called it the hungry gap. Sounds almost poetic until you realize what it actually meant. Your stored grain from last harvest? Running low. New crops? Still green shoots in the ground. For roughly 6 weeks, peasant families survived on dried peas, whatever sprouted grains hadn't gone moldy, and foraged nettles. Yes, those stinging plants that make your skin burn. Desperate times, desperate salads. Eggs were a spring treat, not a breakfast staple. Chickens don't lay year-round without artificial light. Longer spring days triggered their laying cycle. So those Easter eggs we associate with the holiday, originally just a celebration of finally the hens are producing again. My grandmother used to say eggs tasted better when you'd waited all winter for them. She wasn't wrong. Fresh vegetables existed from June through October, 4 months. That's it. The remaining 8 months meant root vegetables, preserved everything, and prayers that the grain held out. And the weird part is how much wild food peasants actually knew. Medieval cookbooks list over 100 plants that regular people gathered from forests and fields. Dandelions, wild garlic, nettles again. We call these weeds now, they called them dinner. Then the church made everything more complicated. Fasting rules banned meat for roughly half the calendar year. Half! This forced peasants to get creative with fish, eggs, and vegetables. Not out of health consciousness, out of religious requirement with legal consequences, but creativity requires ingredients. And getting those ingredients involved tools most of us have never seen. The equipment medieval peasants used might seem primitive, but their ingenuity with simple implements, that's where things get genuinely impressive. Here's the thing about medieval cooking tools. You could fit everything a peasant family owned in a single drawer, and yet they made it work for generations. Wooden spoons were the workhorse of every meal. Not because peasants loved the rustic aesthetic. Metal cost money. Wood didn't burn your hands when stirring boiling pottage for 20 minutes straight. Simple logic. The mortar and pestle deserves more respect than it gets. Grinding grain by hand? That's a workout. Kids started learning this skill around age 7, and by adulthood, they had forearms that would make modern gym enthusiasts jealous. No protein shakes required. Now here's where medieval ingenuity gets clever. Trivets. Those 3-leg metal stands that elevated pots above the coals. Want higher heat? Lower the pot. Need a gentle simmer? Raise it up. Temperature control without any dials or buttons. Just geometry and common sense. But what about tasks needing serious heat? Leather bellows solve that problem beautifully. Squeeze them toward the fire, and suddenly you've got enough airflow to boil massive quantities of water. One tool for cooking, laundry, and anything else requiring intense temperatures. The pot crane might be my favorite invention, though. Picture a metal arm hanging from ceiling beams with notches cut along its length. Swing the pot over the fire, swing it away, adjust the height by moving to different notches. It's basically a medieval stovetop control system made from a stick and some hooks. And the weird part is, that's nearly everything. A fully equipped peasant kitchen contained maybe 10 or 12 tools total. Spoons, a knife, the cauldron, perhaps a griddle stone, some hooks, maybe a bellows if they were lucky. That's it. Modern kitchens have drawers stuffed with gadgets we've used exactly once. Avocado slicers, egg separators, that weird thing Aunt Margaret gave us for Christmas. Meanwhile, medieval families raised children, survived winters, and fed entire households with fewer tools than most people keep in their camping gear. Sometimes less really was more. But tools only matter if you actually have food to cook. And getting that food, that depended entirely on what month it was.